You ever watch someone dig their own grave so enthusiastically that you almost feel bad for them? Almost. Because what we're about to watch is Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, walk directly into a trap so obvious, so perfectly laid, that a first-year law student could have seen it coming from orbit. A member of Congress, Representative Dan Goldman from New York, just spent 4 minutes laying out a devastating case. He named names, he cited dates, he produced social media posts, he showed how this Department of Justice forced out a prosecutor for refusing to bring charges without evidence, installed Trump's personal defense lawyer with zero prosecution experience, tried to indict a political enemy not once, but twice, and got rejected by 2 separate grand juries in the same week, something that happens in roughly 0.04% of cases. And then he asked the simplest question imaginable, the kind of question that has a one-word answer, a number, a statistic. How many of Epstein's co-conspirators have you indicted? And Pam Bondi's response? Chaos, screaming, interruptions, personal insults, the chairman having to step in, the word filibuster getting thrown around. A grown woman, the top law enforcement officer in the country, reduced to shouting, "You don't tell me," at a member of Congress like a teenager who just got grounded. She never answered the question. She couldn't answer the question because the answer is 0. 0 Epstein co-conspirators indicted, 0 perpetrators brought to justice, 0 accountability for the men whose faces are in those photographs, whose names are in those files, whose flights are on those logs. But boy, did they try to indict Tish James? Boy, did they try to get someone, anything, on a woman who had the audacity to hold Donald Trump's companies accountable for fraud. So what we're about to watch is not a hearing. It's not oversight. It's an expose of a Department of Justice that has infinite resources to punish the president's enemies and absolutely nothing for the victims of a child sex trafficking ring. Let's watch. I'll break it down for you. I need a minute.
Yeah. Okay. And are you up next? Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I want to begin by acknowledging the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's horrific abuse who are in the room with us today. I want to thank all of you for your bravery in speaking out. And I want to say that you and the other survivors of these heinous crimes deserve better from this Department of Justice. In particular, it is shocking that the department did not redact the names of Epstein's victims, but it did redact the names of their abusers. I don't know whether this was done out of incompetence or whether it was deliberate and malicious, but either way, it is completely unacceptable. Even more troubling, the DOJ has failed to bring any of these perpetrators to justice. Instead, it has engaged in a relentless pursuit of Donald Trump's perceived enemies. I want to focus on just one example. The Attorney General of my home state of New York, Tish James. This DOJ has been hell-bent on securing an indictment against Ms. James for something, anything, simply because she held Donald Trump's companies accountable for years of financial fraud. And indeed, the department manufactured an investigation against her for alleged, quote, mortgage fraud. But the U.S. attorney leading the investigation, Eric Siebert, a Trump appointee, refused to bring charges against Ms. James because there was simply no evidence. Unfortunately, a prosecutor who refuses to do Trump's bidding has no place in this DOJ, so Mr. Siebert was forced out. Trump could not contain his fury that he expressed to you in a social media post addressed to you by name. I'm sure you've seen it. Quote, "I fired him and there is a great case," he wrote to you about Mr. Siebert. "Then we moved down. We can't delay any longer. It's killing our reputation and credibility. They impeached me twice and indicted me 5 times over nothing. Justice must be served now." And obviously, you followed that order. Lindsay Halligan, Trump's former defense lawyer who had never prosecuted a case in her life, was installed to replace Mr. Siebert, and it was clear that part of her mandate was to go after Ms. James. Halligan immediately sought an indictment, which the court dismissed because Halligan was illegally put into the role. But your department was undeterred, and not once, but twice, it tried to indict Attorney General James in separate courts. Both grand juries rejected you and refused to indict her. It is practically unheard of for a grand jury to refuse an indictment. In 2016, it happened in just 6 cases out of over 150,000 offenses. And you had it happen twice in the same week. in 2 different courts. That must have been humiliating. And now there are reports that you are continuing to investigate her. The amount of resources that have gone into targeting Attorney General James, months of investigations, multiple failed indictments, is astounding. Since your own prosecutors told you that there is not enough evidence to support a conviction, it's clear that you were going after her simply because she held President Trump accountable and he wants to punish her. And she is just one name on a long list of Trump political enemies that DOJ is reportedly targeting. From Jerome Powell and Lisa Cook at the Federal Reserve to James Comey, numerous Democratic members of Congress, John Brennan, Jack Smith, Democratic officials in Minnesota, Chris Krebs, Miles Taylors, and more. And those are just the ones we know about. In contrast to these politically motivated investigations, grasping at something they can charge their enemies with, we now have concrete evidence of disgusting criminality revealed in the Epstein files. So I really have just one question for you. How many of Epstein's co-conspirators have you indicted? How many perpetrators are you even investigating?
First, you showed it. I find it.
How many have you indicted?
Excuse me. I'm going to answer the question.
Answer my question.
No, I'm going to answer the question the way I want to answer the question.
No,
Your
you're going to answer
theatrics
the
are
question
ridiculous.
the way I asked it.
Chairman Jordan, I'm not going to get in the gutter with these people, but I'm going to answer the question.
How many have you indicted?
Again, the time belongs to
Reclaiming my time.
The time belongs.
I think it's very interesting.
Reclaiming my time.
I think it's very interesting.
And you can
that
reclaim
he
your
talks
time.
about they
Reclaiming my time,
indicted.
Mr.
The
Chairman.
president said they
Close the
indicted
clock.
him twice.
Mr. Chairman, please
They
stop the
sure
clock and
did.
stop the
he
clock and
indicted-
restore his time.
Okay, here we go with these
Committee will be in order.
theatrics.
The time
Reclaiming my
belongs to
time
the
and
gentleman
reel
from
back
New
the clock,
York.
please.
We will give you a few more seconds. We will do that. But when
Reclaiming
you ask
my-
a question, the
The
witness
question
gets to
was-
answer. You may not like the answer, but she
Right.
gets
The
to answer.
question was, how many of Epstein's...
They don't like
What?
the answer,
Reclaiming
Chairman,
my time.
because it's honest.
Reclaiming
So
my-
he asked a
Reclaiming my
4-minute
time.
question.
Restore 45
and
seconds to
I am
Mr. Nadler,
going
please,
to
Mr. Chairman.
I mean,
Answer.
You can let her filibuster all day long, but not on our watch.
Reclaiming-
Not on our time. No way. And
Reclaiming-
I told you about that, Attorney General, before you started.
You don't tell me
Yeah, oh, I
anything,
did tell you because we
washed
saw
up
what you did in the
loser
Senate.
Lawyer, not even a lawyer.
Committee will be in order.
Time, and I should get back at least 45 seconds.
We will give you a few more seconds. I
Not a
said that
few more,
already.
45 seconds.
Okay, I'm timing right now, Mr. Nadler. Go
All
ahead.
right.
Reclaiming my time. The answer to my question, how many of Epstein's co-conspirators has she indicted, is 0. You have been the Attorney General for a whole year, and your DOJ fired the lead prosecutor of this case, sat on evidence this entire time, and claimed falsely last July that there were no more leads. It took an act of Congress for you to finally release part of the Epstein files, and when you did, you included personal information about the victims while protecting the names of abusers.
Time of the gentleman
None of
has
the perpetrators
expired.
have been brought to justice, but enormous resources
Time
have been
of the
dedicated
gentleman
to
has
pursuing Trump's
expired,
enemies.
and
It's
obviously
clear
there
that
was-
under your leadership, the Department of Justice
There
no
was
longer
no
works for
question
American
in there
people. It works
for her to
for Donald
respond to.
Trump. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
May I answer?
I think our next questioner, Madam Attorney General, is going to give you time to respond to.
Thank you, Chairman.
Not because what we just watched was complicated. It wasn't. It was actually remarkably simple. One member of Congress asked one question with one expected answer, a number, a statistic, a figure, and the Attorney General of the United States completely unraveled. I need a minute because what we just witnessed is the most perfect, most damning illustration of what this Department of Justice has become that I have ever seen on C-SPAN. Let's walk through it piece by piece because the layers here are deep. Dan Goldman walks in and does something really smart. He doesn't just attack, he contrasts. On one side, you have Jeffrey Epstein, dead sex trafficker. His crimes are documented. His victims are named. His co-conspirators are photographed with him at parties with underage girls. There is evidence. There are witness statements. There are flight logs. There are emails. There are decades of complaints. On the other side, you have Tish James, New York Attorney General. She did her job. She investigated Donald Trump's company. She found fraud. She proved it in court. She got a judgment. That's it. That's the crime. Now look at how the DOJ has treated these two situations. For Epstein's co-conspirators, 0 indictments, 0 investigations, 0 accountability. Files released only because Congress forced it. Victims' names exposed. Abusers' names redacted. For Tish James, endless resources, multiple investigations, a U.S. attorney forced out for refusing to bring charges without evidence. Trump's personal lawyer installed with zero experience. 2 separate grand juries in 2 separate courts. Both said no. Both rejected the indictment. In the same week. Something that happens in 6 cases out of 150,000. Goldman laid that out with the precision of a surgeon. And then he asked the question that Bondi couldn't answer. How many of Epstein's co-conspirators have you indicted? Watch what happens next. It's actually fascinating. Bondi doesn't answer. She can't answer. Because the answer is 0, and she knows how bad that looks next to the Tish James persecution saga. So she does what she always does. She attacks. She interrupts. She tries to change the subject to Trump's impeachments. She appeals to Chairman Jordan. She accuses Goldman of not letting her answer, while refusing to answer. And then she says something truly revealing. Pam Bondi says, I'm not going to get in the gutter with these people. These people. The elected representative of New York's 10th Congressional District, a former federal prosecutor, a member of the committee conducting oversight of her department. These people. That's not the language of someone engaged in good faith dialogue. That's the language of someone who sees herself as above accountability, above Congress, above the American people. Let's talk about those grand juries for a second, because Goldman is right and the statistics are staggering. In 2016, federal grand juries refused to indict in exactly 6 cases out of over 150,000. That's 0.004%. It is practically impossible to get a grand jury to say no. Prosecutors are legendary for being able to indict a ham sandwich if they want to. The standard is probable cause, which is basically nothing. And this DOJ, with all its resources, with all its political motivation, with Trump personally tweeting at the Attorney General by name demanding, justice must be served now, this DOJ went to 2 grand juries, in 2 different courts, in the same week. Both said no. That is not a close call. That is not a disagreement among reasonable people. That is a sign that the case was so weak, so lacking in evidence, so obviously manufactured, that ordinary citizens, the kinds of people who usually trust prosecutors, looked at what the DOJ brought and said, absolutely not. And Bondi still won't drop it. There are reports she's still investigating. For what? For fraud that didn't happen? For crimes that don't exist? For the sin of holding Donald Trump accountable? Goldman rattles off names: Joan Powell, Lisa Cook, James Comey, John Brennan, Jack Smith, Chris Krebs, Miles Taylor, Democratic officials in Minnesota, Democratic members of Congress. That's not a random list. That's a hit list. That's every person who has ever crossed Donald Trump in any meaningful way. Powell and Cook at the Federal Reserve, targeted for what? For doing their jobs? For making economic decisions the president didn't like? Comey and Brennan, career intelligence officials who testified truthfully about things the president didn't want revealed. Jack Smith, the man who indicted Trump, now under investigation himself. Krebs, the cybersecurity official who said the 2020 election was secure, fired, now investigated. Miles Taylor, former DHS official who criticized Trump anonymously, now investigated. This is not law enforcement. This is revenge. This is using the full power of the federal government to punish people for political disagreements. And here's the part that should make you sick. Goldman mentions the Epstein files release, the one Congress had to force, the one Bondi fought against. When they finally released them, what did they do? They redacted the names of the abusers, the powerful men, the politicians, the billionaires, but they did not redact the names of the victims, the children, the survivors, the women who have spent decades trying to hide their identities from public view. Whether that was incompetence or malice, Goldman asks. Either way, it's unacceptable. But let's be real for a second. Incompetence would mean the DOJ accidentally exposed sex trafficking victims while protecting their traffickers. Malice would mean they did it on purpose. Which one is worse? Does it even matter? The result is the same. Victims re-traumatized, abusers protected, justice delayed. Again. At the end, after all the chaos, after all the interruptions, after all the personal insults, Goldman answers his own question. The answer to my question, how many of Epstein's co-conspirators has she indicted, is 0. He says it for the record. He says it for the survivors in the room. He says it for everyone watching at home. 0, not 1. A year as Attorney General. A Department of Justice with unlimited resources. A president who claims he wants the files released. And 0 indictments. But Tish James, they tried twice, in 1 week, and failed twice. They can investigate a state attorney general for months. They can push out experienced prosecutors who refuse to play ball. They can install Trump's personal lawyer with 0 experience. They can go to 2 grand juries in 2 courts in the same week. They can keep investigating even after both grand juries say no. But for child sex trafficking? For the men whose faces are in those photos? For the co-conspirators whose names are in those files? For the perpetrators who actually committed crimes? Nothing. 0. Not because there's no evidence. There's plenty. Not because the statute of limitations expired. It hasn't. Not because the victims don't want justice. They're sitting in the room. Because the men in those photos are powerful. Because the names in those files are connected. Because pursuing them would mean holding accountable people who attend the same fundraisers, who donate to the same campaigns, who sit in the same rooms as the people running this country. And this DOJ will not do that. They will investigate Tish James for doing her job. They will investigate Jack Smith for doing his job. They will investigate anyone who ever dared to hold Donald Trump accountable. But they will not investigate Jeffrey Epstein's friends. Because that's not what this Department of Justice is for, not anymore.